If you're a little bit confused and you're not sure when to use an Agents.md, custom agent, skills, prompts, instructions, and so on, I'm not going to blame you. This is why in this video, I'm going to explain all of that and with all these differences so that you know when to use which. And with that said, let's get started.
All right, guys. So this is usually how my code bases would look like nowadays. And I'm going to start with the very first file that I'm always using. It is called Agents.md. And Agents.md is actually coming from Anthropic since they released their Claude.md. But since we have different vendors such as OpenAI and so on, companies agreed that it actually makes sense to have just one Agents.md instead of having different markdown files for different vendors, right? And what you're going to put here is overall your code base information, your project information. Now, Copilot, given that you're using GitHub, of course, that's why I have a .github folder. If you're not using GitHub, you can also have .claude, for example, or something else. In GitHub, you would usually have Copilot Copilot-instructions.md, and this actually serves the same purpose. Now, you would ask me, should you have this one or this one? And the answer is, it's actually more important to use Agents.md. But, for example, let me go to the website of the GitHub Copilot code reviews. So they have this feature called Copilot Code Review, where you can actually add Copilot as a reviewer of your pull request, and it's going to go back and in the background create some comments for you. This means that it's only going to work if you have Copilot instructions. If you have only Agents.md, actually it's not working at the moment while I'm recording the video. That's why it's always good to have this Copilot instructions.md and simply say that, hey, please refer to Agents.md and give it the URL so that it doesn't get lost, and say that just go there for all the repo instructions. And this is how you're also going to have this feature of Copilot code reviews. Okay, so keep in mind Agents.md is more important. Now, what about Agents.md? Now, the thing is, recently we found out, thanks to this paper, that Agents.md is actually behaving much more differently than we expected. And this paper has revealed some interesting stuff. So let's go over these stuff. First of all, auto-generated Agents.mds actually reduce the success rate by 3%, but not only that, but our costs are also exploding by 20%. Now, what do we mean by auto-generated Agents.md? So usually when you create a project, or let's say you already have some code base, but you're lacking the Agents.md file, what you would do is /init prompt, and then this would actually scaffold or create your Agents.md. And this is going to be done by an LLM. And the paper that we just saw actually argues that human-written Agents.md, so by your hand, are actually not only improving the accuracy, but they're also improving the costs, because every time you do init and let the LLM generate the Agents.md, it's going to put a lot of things. For example, like now, even though I'm using the best practices for Agents.md, for example, I have my do's, I have my architecture overview, I have my don'ts, I have my commands, and so on. But let's take a look at the results of this paper. We also have the fact that codebase overviews in Agents.md actually doesn't help the agents. So actually the LLMs are going to look into your project themselves and understand what you have there. And this is why you shouldn't duplicate the information within Agents.md. So instead, you should focus on what, why, and how. So tell it about your tech stack, your project structure, which is also critical for monorepos because they tend to be more complicated. Tell it why, just tell it the purpose. And also tell it how. For example, if you're using UV instead of pip in Python, or let's say if you're using bun instead of npm, just tell it. Otherwise, it might get confused sometimes. And this is pretty much it. Also, another good practice is to include an Agent.md for each service or for each directory that you have. For example, I have a backend and frontend architecture here, and I have my Agents.md for frontend, I have my Agents.md for the backend, and one overall Agents.md, even though it does look kind of bloated at the moment. So it definitely can be improved. Okay, now let's take a look at agents. So agents are your specialized colleagues. And by the way, I'm using Claude Haiku 4.5 just because it's cheaper. Agents can be found here. So we have an agent, we have an ask mode, plan mode, but here are my custom agents. So I have a DevOps expert that actually specializes in DevOps. I have a React front-end engineer, and we have Guilfoyle from the Silicon Valley series. By the way, go watch it, it's very funny. But let's take a look at each of these and how they look like. For example, Guilfoyle is going to have a description, it's going to have a name and tools, and I'm going to talk about these in a minute. But usually what you would find in production at the moment within most of the teams that are using LLMs and agents is one orchestrator agent. You would find one planner agent for just planning the feature or planning a bug fix the developer is about to do, and of course a coder agent. Now the reason we separate these is because we want to keep our context window clean and not polluted. So orchestrator agent is not going to plan anything. It's not going to write any code. It's only going to give instructions to the planner. The planner is going to plan something, give it back to the orchestrator. Orchestrator is going to take this data and give it to the coder agent, and coder agent doesn't have any other pollution of its content, right? It still has a lot of tokens to burn, and its memory is kind of fresh. So it's going to do a much better job compared to if only one agent, the orchestrator agent, has to do planning and coding itself. And going back to the code, what are actually these tools that I have here? So if I open the chat and I click this button here, you will see that I can configure some tools, and there are some built-in tools. For example, browser, you can open the browser, you can execute something, you can read something, and these are literally built into VS Code and actually many IDEs. And this is why these agents can actually perform or use some of these tools. And of course, you give some kind of a personality to an agent. Now, the cool thing is that you don't have to spend time on doing that. There are some repositories such as Awesome Copilot, and I usually go and find an agent for myself here. And I just literally go through the list of an agent that I usually need. But by the way, this repository is kind of a gem because they don't only have agents, they also have instructions, skills, plugins, and so on. So make sure to save it in your bookmarks, and I'm going to tell you all about these things within a minute. Just one thing before we finish with agents, you can actually create your own tools within your IDE. And also Claude recently released this feature of orchestrating teams of Claude sessions, and it's still experimental, but it's going to come out, like it's going to be available to everyone very soon. But what the idea is that this is what we currently have, like sub agents, okay? And we can also have agent teams. This is a bit different because you can, let's say, have a planner agent and coder agent running in parallel, and they report to the main agent, which is the orchestrator, as we saw. But in agent teams, these teammates or these agents can actually communicate with each other. And this is just a slightly different architecture, which also gives us some improvements. Now let's go back to the IDE and take a look at hooks. So what do you think hooks are? Well, hooks are kind of self-explanatory, because if we look at this JSON file of each hook, we're going to see that, and by the way, I also took it from Awesome Copilot repository. You can just literally install it within one button click from the repository itself, and you're going to see that hooks have different lifecycle methods such as session end, session start. So it kind of gives you a clue that these hooks are running every time you make some kind of a prompt. And in this case, I have a governance audit hook, and also I have secret scanner. So this one is going to scan for any secrets that I accidentally expose within my code, which is bad. And this is the one that also going to run some kind of an agent, I guess an LLM, or do some checks with shell scripts. I don't really know what it's actually doing there, but I know that it's helpful for my projects. And I'm also going to show you how exactly it works. So let me switch to, let's say, Guilfoyle, and I'm going to ask it to analyze my HTML quality. So let's see how it makes fun of me. Okay, so it actually found a lot of issues regarding accessibility in my HTML files, but what I want to show you is actually here. So if I go to this settings and I show the agent logs, you're going to see that every time you make a prompt, it loads the instructions first, then it loads the skills. We're going to talk about these two as well. And it also loads the hooks before it loads the agent itself. So hooks are always, depending on how they are set up, they're always going to run before the prompt, and they can also run after the prompt. So you basically get the idea. Let's say every time I make a prompt, it's my secret scanner is always going to let's say, check if I have left any secrets here. Okay, now what are instructions then? If I open my instruction files, I will see that I have two markdown files. First one is called accessibility or A11Y instructions, and I have also one for localization. And this one is applied to MD files, interestingly, and this one is applied to everything. But you get basically the idea. They're responsible for giving a guideline or instructions rather for accessibility. Now, what you usually do with instructions is you don't hope that the LLM is going to pick them up automatically, although it can every time you ask a question. For example, if I ask it again, hey, please check my accessibility quality of my HTML files, it's not a given that it's also always going to refer to this instructions.md file. So instead, what you need to do so that it always does refer to it is mention them within your agents.md. So I've done it here already. For accessibility related topic, refer to this file, and localization refer to this file. So let's test it out really quickly. So this is the question that I ask, and let's see what it says. And I'm already seeing that while it's working, it's already reading the file that I need. So as you see, it found a bunch of things. Now it's much more specific, just the way I described within my accessibility.instructions.md, and it actually did refer. And trust me, I tried without referring it in agents.md, and it actually skipped this file completely. Now we still have prompts to talk about, and I have one prompt called explain code prompt. Now prompts are something that you already saw. So the way you use a prompt is by pressing a slash, and you have a lot of pre-built prompts, and you can actually they can also come from some of your skills. But I have one explain code prompt, so I'm gonna use this guy, and let's say I'm gonna open one of my front-end files. I'm gonna select this line of React because let's say I'm not sure what exactly it's doing. And if I tell it explain this line by using this prompt, it's also always going to make sure that it analyzes or explains this code, but the way that I described it here. So it's going to provide the following steps. It's going to give me a brief overview, step-by-step breakdown, explanation of any key concepts, and so on. So you get the idea. Now let's talk about these skills. So skills actually again originated by Anthropic. Apparently Anthropic is doing a lot of innovation compared to other vendors in my opinion. And I have two skills, one for breakdowns plan and one for Postgres. And the breakdown plan is basically a skill for breaking down a feature into epics, features, user stories, enablers, and so on. Basically following the agile or scaled agile methodology. And the goal is to act as a senior project manager. And this is something that I would usually use because I don't trust an LLM to go out to the internet or look at what it has learned within its training and figure out that this is exactly the way I want my skills to be broken down. This is why I'm giving custom knowledge or custom instruction for things that it should do. So for example, if I create a new chat and if I say I want to introduce a discount coupon feature to my app, please break it down with the plan first. And if I look at the skill, I'm going to have a description, which is issue planning and automation prompt. So basically from this description and from the name, the LLM will know that it has to use this custom skill that I've added. So let's click and see how exactly it does it. And I'm already seeing that it's actually reading this breakdown plan skill. So this is the direction that I wanted. Okay, so I've been waiting for a couple of minutes now, and I see that this skill is actually quite extensive, and it does a lot of job of a product owner or product manager. So depending on how big your team is, maybe you actually don't need this skill as a developer at the end of the day. But if you're the only developer, maybe you do need to, maybe you do need some help of like dividing your feature into epics and features and user stories and giving priority to them or not, and so on. As you can see, it did create a couple of files here for my reference, but it also almost took half of my context, which is not great. So really be careful with these skills and only install the skills that you are sure that you're going to need as a developer. All right. And finally, we have the workflows. So these are very specific to GitHub. So if you're using GitHub, you can also use the workflows. And these are basically build pipelines that are AI driven. For example, I have one called Daily Issue Report, and this one is running on day week, so on schedule, and it's basically going to generate a daily summary of open issues and recently activity as a GitHub issue. And this is going to be run as a GitHub action, or let's say a pipeline within GitHub every day. So you can come to this page, and I'm going to link it in the description, and you can check out the video of how exactly it works, so you can set it up for your team as well. I'm actually finding it quite useful at this point. And this is pretty much it. If you like my setup, go copy it and don't be shy, and let me know in the comments if you're using something else, if you're using something differently, and if you have tips for me to improve my setup. I'm pretty sure you do have something. And I'm gonna see you guys in the next one. Go check out my AI for Developers playlist. Maybe you find it interesting, and goodbye.